at work, but usually behind the scenes. Amen. So Epiphany is this weird ceremony where we talk about this light shining, and it really makes sense because God actually created some sort of light in the sky. We're not exactly sure what it was, whether it was an actual star, because the Greek does not actually have a word for orb, floating orb of light. So it might have been like a star very, very far away, and only a couple of people had the astrologer compasses to figure out exactly where it is. But I don't think it was an actual like star that God temporarily created, because they follow it to Jerusalem, and then it moves, and they follow it to Bethlehem, which is in a different direction, and then it's over a specific house. So whatever it was, they used the word that they had for light in the sky, though aster, this word for star. But they're following this light. Before there was LED, before there were drones, right? Now we could just say, hey, you're following a drone, you must live in New Jersey. But they didn't have that back then, right? And so they're following this thing that only God could pull off, and it ends up over a specific house. And that's Epiphany. The word epiphano means to like shine, to reveal, to make known. And they followed this light, this phino, this light, all the way to see the light of the world. Now, they did not know that they were going to be in Podunk, Bethlehem, in sliver of a country, part of the Roman province of Israel, and one of the most podunkiest cities in that entire part of the world, with all of their security detail, with all their animals, their camels, their gold, their frankincense, and myrrh. There's no way that they would have known ahead of time that they were going to be kneeling down and worshiping a kid who was probably 2 or 3 months old. No way that they could have known that. They didn't get to see the script ahead of time. They just trusted God, and they got to see Jesus. Now, that's an incredible gift. I will never get to see baby Jesus. Unless Jesus is like, hey, let me pull up unless, Jesus' mom, she's like, one of my favorite things is I've got all these baby pictures in my purse now. Check this out, right? Then you can see them, right? But unless God pulls off a miracle, and maybe on request, you can say, hey, let me see what you look like as a baby. Then Jesus can go, oh, and maybe you could see it, right? In heaven. But we have no guarantees, but they did. They did. They got to see his face. And they got to see the awe and wonder in Joseph and Mary's face as they said, and by the way, we brought you gold, frankincense, and myrrh. That's pretty cool. But to get there, even though they didn't have the script, they had to trust God that he knew what he was doing. And they did. And wow, what a gift. Today on Epiphany, I want to look at somebody else in this whole conversation that we really don't usually talk about leading up to Christmas so much, and that's Joseph. Mary, before she got pregnant, was told by an angel, Gabriel, that she was going to have a godchild, the godchild. And she's probably 14 years old at that time, so we don't really know, but she at least had this visit from an actual angel when she wasn't asleep. Joseph, on the other hand, who had already gotten engaged to her and was promised to her and had promised, and she had been promised to him, he has no idea what's going on. He just knows the lady that I'm about to marry is already pregnant. That's not ideal. So he decides, I'm not going to shame her. I'm not going to invoke the rules of the law that allow me to require her to be put to death because she's broken my honor. I'm just going to let her be, and especially if she says, hey, this child is God's child, I imagine Joseph would probably think she's a little delusional, right? And he would be reasonable. But then he has a dream. He has a dream, and the dream says, Joseph, I am your father. No, Joseph, I am that kid's father. So marry her, and this child will be the godchild you and all your people have been looking forward to seeing since the day they were born. And many people died before they got to see the godchild. But Joseph, he's going to be a child in your household. How cool is that? He didn't see the script, but he trusted the person who was in charge. So he followed the script. Fine, I'll marry her. By the way, got the mail today, babe. And I know you're like 8.5 months pregnant. And I know you already got your gynecologist that you really like. I know you already have the midwife all set up. I know you already are excited about like your family being able to see the baby and mom being there. But according to the rules, we got to go to Bethlehem. What? We got to go to Bethlehem. So he has to go to Bethlehem. They didn't have the script, but they trusted the one who was in charge. So they go to Bethlehem. And then baby pops out, and then dirty shepherds, which we talked about, dirty shepherds show up. And then they say like, oh, your child is the hope of all things. Your child is the one that everybody has been waiting for ever since Genesis 3:15, the Garden of Eden. You're the hope of every generation. And I'm going to go and finish the whiskey bottle that I was just about to finish off before the angels showed up, right? Weird. And then they go to the temple, and then Simeon and Anna, they have this whole interchange where like a strange man walks up and picks up their kid and is like, oh, and has this like awesome thing like, now I can die because I've seen God in the flesh. Weird. And then he looks at Mary and says, by the way, it's going to feel like a sword is stabbing you in the heart when he grows up. Here's your kid back. See ya. Weird. They didn't know the script. They just followed along. And then Anna, this really old lady, walks up, might have even been like 100 years old, walks up and says, oh, the Savior of the world. Wonderful. Okay, I'll see you later. Bye. So they go back to Bethlehem to just kind of settle in. We talked about in Advent that Joseph probably had some pretty dysfunctional family. Hey, any of you have dysfunctional family? Okay. So then they go back to Bethlehem and probably were just settling in. And then some weirdos, but rich weirdos with like lots of security, knocks on your door and says, we're here to worship your kid. Joseph and Mary didn't know the script, but they trusted the one who was in charge. And then you get this gold and frankincense and myrrh. And then in a dream, Joseph is told, Herod's looking to kill your kid. You got to move. So where are we moving to? Egypt. Now, for them to move to Egypt, that would be like you moving to deep, deep Mexico. How many of you know Spanish? How many of you are not connected to drug cartels that could keep you alive? Please have your hand up because I want to make sure we are not in trouble with anybody deep in Mexico, okay? Not a safe place. It is not a safe place, and terrible things happen down there. Egypt was probably more dangerous then than it is now. So now you're going to take your kid, just a few months old, and freshly not pregnant Mary, and go live in a land where terrible things happen. But they got this visit. Isn't it convenient that they had gold, frankincense, and myrrh when a traveling carpenter would be going to a place, staying for who knows how long, until he could finally get work, and then eventually move back and start over again in a new place? Isn't it convenient that they just so happen to have dropped from the heavens, basically, gold, frankincense, and myrrh? How many of you know what gold is? Okay, frankincense is a spice, very nice back then. We can get it at the store. They didn't have supermarkets. They didn't have like malls. They didn't have, like Amazon Prime. So it's actually quite valuable, and they could sell this to quite wealthy people. The myrrh, same similar sort of thing. Now, people have tied the gold, frankincense, and myrrh to things like Jesus is king, he's the high priest, and he's the suffering prophet. I think that's a bit of a stretch. But God can do all sorts of things and have all sorts of parallels. But my point here is Joseph and Mary were going to be wandering homeless people unless God paid the bills. And just before they needed those bills paid, treasures showed up. They followed the script. Or, I'm sorry, they didn't have the script, but they trusted in the one who was in charge. How many of you realize that you do not have the script in front of you of your entire life? How many of you, if you were the writer, would change a few things? Maybe you'd be a little taller. Maybe you would be a little thinner. I sure would. Maybe you'd be a little more muscular. Maybe a little more healthy. Maybe you'd be a little bit wealthier. Maybe your house would be bigger. Maybe you would have a hot tub. Maybe you'd have a swimming pool. Maybe you would have so much money that you would have a hot tub inside your swimming pool. There are things that we do not like. If we were writing the script, we would write such a better story. So much of a better story. No one at Zion would ever die. Nobody at Zion would ever get sick. Nobody at Zion would ever not win the lottery when you buy your weekly ticket. There would not be an impending snowstorm completely rearranging a Sunday morning, the first Sunday of the year. What a great start. Man. There's so many things that we would write differently. I imagine Joseph would have stayed in Nazareth. As things were being revealed, being shown to Joseph, I guarantee you he would not have a wife who has a kid that's not his. I guarantee you he would not have gone to Egypt. And not knowing what great things were in store, I guarantee you those wise men would have continued to not live on the road and go to a podunk armpit town, in a podunk armpit part of the world, when they were serving kings, living in the nice rooms in the palaces because they were the God talkers in their area. Isn't it great that God writes things on the script that we don't like when we're going through it? I was supposed to go back to Texas when I got out of the seminary. And look at the great things that we get to do now. Together. Us. There are so many things in our scripts, the scripts of our life, that we would not like and we would not want when they're happening. Aren't you glad the one who is writing it knows what he's doing? Aren't you glad that the one who's writing it likes you even more than you like you? My biggest thorn in my flesh, the one who messes up most of the things that I want to go perfect is, can you take a guess? Me. You get yourself in more trouble than anybody else. And how many times do you get yourself into trouble and you know you're getting yourself into trouble when you're doing it? Aren't you glad you aren't writing the script? Aren't you glad that it all doesn't just depend on you? If I were writing the script of the universe, I wouldn't have thought up God walking among us. I would have thought up something like people who mostly have it together, they get to make it. I would have it where people who don't make me mad would make it. I would have never come up with something so mind-blowing that God would walk among us and come down as a zygote, which became a fetus, which is just an unborn child, and then got squeezed out in armpit town of armpit part of the world at that time, and then grow up anonymously, unnoticed for like 30, 34 years, and then walk around as a wandering nomad homeless guy, walking on water and feeding people and, taking care of business and raising the dead. And then that our king would go to a cross as his throne for us to just clean slate it for us. I wouldn't have made that up. I doubt you would have. And then for him to come back for us and just let us all off the hook? I wouldn't have come up with that. Aren't you glad you aren't writing the script? Aren't you glad God is? There's so many things that we would not like. And in those moments, and maybe you're in these moments, I would invite you to trust God, the ultimate producer. In the world of film industry, the producer is a weird job. If the writing needs to be better, he makes sure that it gets better. If the director is doing a bad job and is mean to the actors or whatever, or is just making a bad show, it is that person's job to make sure it happens. They're supposed to bankroll it, they're supposed to pay for it, they're supposed to sponsor it, but the one who really is in charge of the whole thing is the producer. They're the one who makes it happen and makes it good. Aren't you glad you're not the producer? If you ask most actors, characters, if they're happy of all the bad stuff that happened in the shows, of course they're not. Of course they're not. But it works out in the end. Aren't you glad you aren't writing the script? Now, if you're in a part of your story that you don't like, I encourage you to remember, you may not like the story, but you do know the producer. That producer has done everything for us, born for us, died for us, rose for us, and came down to include you. That producer is literally going to put his body and blood on a silver platter and serve it to you tonight. You may not like the story. You may not like the plot, but you do know God. You do know the producer. And so like Joseph, like the wise men, we trust. Knowing that, because he's in charge, he's going to make us part of better stuff. Better stuff than if you were writing the script. Aren't you glad you are not writing the script? At the end of every one of our conversations, we give each other a little bit of space to have our own conversations with God. This is your time. This is your moment. This is your moment with God.